Osteoporosis. It's just something that happens when you age, especially to women. There's nothing you can do about it. Good luck. Take some calcium. Probably your bones are going to fall apart, right? Wrong. Osteoporosis is related directly to your stomach. That's right, your stomach. I'm Dr. Shark with Shark Holistic Health. I am an acupuncture physician who has practiced in California and Florida and now Mexico. I am not an MD. Our telemedicine clinic, Shark Holistic Health, helps patients with functional medicine, Chinese herbs, and nutrition to recover their health naturally and permanently. I've been in private practice for nearly 20 years. I've seen thousands of patients recover. I've taken thousands of hours of advanced education myself, and I now train hundreds of practitioners every year to do what I do in their clinics. And I'm going to share a little bit with you today about what I teach them. So osteoporosis almost every time comes back to problems with the stomach. So let's talk about, what do my bones have to do with my gut? So here we have a stomach, obviously. Now, what do you need to make your bones strong? Most people know this basic answer. You need vitamin D and you need calcium. This is what most people learn. So if you get an osteoporosis diagnosis, you're most likely going to be told to supplement vitamin D and calcium. But what they don't tell you is that calcium doesn't really go from the diet to the bones like that when you supplement it. What you're really doing here is you're trying to keep your blood levels high in hopes of suppressing something called parathyroid hormone, keeping that down, because this is what actually pulls the calcium out of your bones. However, the supplementation is not really very effective for that, which is why you have to keep going back for your DEXA scans, because in fact, it doesn't work. The calcium supplementation doesn't really work. Why is that? Because you're not absorbing vitamin D or this calcium that you're taking most of the time. And that problem comes back to the same reason that you got deficient in these things in the first place. And that is your stomach. And in particular, a lack of stomach acid production, HCl, hydrochloric acid, in the stomach. Why is hydrochloric acid so important for osteoporosis? So the reasons are a little bit complicated, but if you stick with me, I will walk you through it. The first thing is mineral absorption. The acid level of your stomach is critically important to absorb minerals. And the minerals that you need for your bones are, it's true, calcium and phosphorus, or more importantly, phosphate, usually in the form of phosphoric acid, so that these two things can combine together to make something called hydroxyapatite, which you may have heard about with your teeth, how you re-harden your teeth. So hydroxyapatite is, okay, calcium, phosphate, right? And this OH is over here, hydroxy. So this is a chemical formula. So the important part of this is the calcium and the phosphorus. Now these minerals absorb through the stomach because of your acid. If you don't have enough acid, you can't absorb minerals. Not just these, other minerals like zinc get low, right? And so acid is super important for the absorption of minerals. So that's number one when it comes to osteoporosis. The other critical factor we identified was vitamin D. So what about vitamin D? What's that got to do with stomach acid? And this is a little bit more complicated. So stick with me here. So your parietal cells produce something called hydrochloric acid. And then that triggers the production here of lipase. Lipase is an enzyme that breaks down fats. But when you eat fats, they don't come in the form of free fatty acids. They come in a big blob. This blob is too big for lipase to really cut. So there's a small amount of fat digestion that happens in the stomach, but not very much. And that happens because your stomach is a muscle and it churns the fat. So just imagine you put some oil, like if you've ever had a bulletproof coffee or something, and you put the oil in the coffee and then you blend it, right? And when you blend it, it makes the drops into smaller pieces and some of them kind of mix in. So that's happening in your stomach. So most of the fat stays in this little blob and some little drops break off. And then lipase, which is an enzyme, which is basically scissors. Enzymes are like scissors. It comes and it cuts these smaller fats into even smaller bits. So we have these kind of little blobs here that broken off from the mixing process in this high acid environment. Lipase cuts them and it cuts them down into free fatty acids, free fatty acids. So now you have your critical components here. You have your H plus, that is your acid from your hydrochloric acid. And then you have your free fatty acids. These are the components you need to trigger something here, which is called CCK. Okay, CCK has a few different jobs, but one of the jobs is it's going to trigger our gallbladder over here that's hanging out on our liver, gallbladder, to release bile. So gallbladder squishes out a big fat blob of bile. Bile is what's important here because most of our fat is still in the blob. And even though CCK also triggers more lipase to come from the pancreas, those little scissors can't cut the big blob. So we've got our big blob here, and it is bile that comes and starts to chop this blob up, right? So it chops the blob into smaller blobs. These blobs are small enough that our lipase can cut them down into free fatty acids. And then the free fatty acids add to more bile. And then we get this little guy here that now has a water-soluble edge. So we got this little fat blob with a water-soluble edge from the bile, and that guy can be absorbed into your lymphatic circulation through the intestine, okay? So that's super important. So what does all this free fatty acid have to do with vitamin D? Vitamin D is one of our fat-soluble vitamins. That means it travels inside fat. So if you cannot digest fat, you cannot digest absorb vitamin D, then you cannot suppress your parathyroid hormone, and then your calcium starts coming out of your bones. And that, my friend, is osteoporosis. The good news is this process right here, this process is reversible by fixing our good friend right here, the stomach acid. So over time, you can reverse this. Now, how much of this calcium can you push back into your bones that you've already lost? It depends on the person. How advanced is the matrix of the bone damaged? How far along is it? But we can start to raise this vitamin D. We can stop this steal where parathyroid hormone is taking calcium out of the bones. We can stop that. We can raise vitamin D, we can get calcium and phosphorus back in the body to rebuild hydroxyapatite, and we can start to repair. So the only question is, how much damage is there? How much time do we have for repair? These things are reversible. You can get better. You do not have to spend the latter years of your life getting worse.